So the topic for this lesson is the Mexican-American War. And our essential question is, what did we gain from the Mexican-American War? We being the United States. So you'll recall in the last lesson we talked about the disputed land between Mexico and the United States. Both countries disagreed about where the border, the southern border for Texas, was. All right. James K. Polk, as you'll also remember, was a big fan of expanding the United States. And he was a big advocate for the border of the United States being as far south as possible at the Rio Grande River. So, as president, Polk sent General Zachary Taylor to the Rio Grande River to guard the border with 4,000 American troops. So, this is the area that was in dispute between the two countries. Mexican troops see this as an invasion of their land because to them, this is area that is owned by Mexico. Mexican troops end up firing on American soldiers in this disputed territory. And President Polk, in an address to Congress where he asked for war, claims that they, being Mexico, shed American blood on American soil. Obviously, an attack on American soldiers could not be ignored, and therefore Congress declared war. Not all members of Congress were in agreement with this expansionist policy. They did not want to pick a fight with Mexico in order to try and gain this land. But because of the attack, they felt that war was justified. So the Mexican-American War began in 1846 and lasted for less than a year, ending in 1847. James K. Polk was president during the entirety of this war. An important thing to remember is that we already had Texas. Remember that Texas had gained its independence from Mexico, had existed as an independent country for almost 10 years, and then was annexed by the United States prior to the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War was fought to get more land. Many historians agree that President Polk was looking for any reason to pick a fight with Mexico, which is why he ordered the troops into that disputed area in the first place. Not only did President Polk want more land in the Texas area, but he also wanted California, and he had approached Mexico with an offer to buy this prior to the war breaking out, had been rejected by Mexico, and therefore was determined to fight to gain this land. The beginning of the war, Mexico saw as an invasion, an illegal invasion of their land. And in all fairness, it was. Us sending troops into that disputed area was an invasion of Mexico. And lastly, citizens of the United States, members of Congress, were split over whether they should fight the war. Though Congress was had a definite majority with declaring war, popular opinion was split on whether they should fight because of the issue of slavery. So the United States defeated Mexico easily. Mexico, as you'll recall, was a pretty young nation. They had just gained their own independence about 20 years earlier. And therefore they were not prepared for war. Once we invaded Mexico City, the war was over. The official end of the war came with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. This set the boundary of Mexico and Texas at the Rio Grande River, all right, the current border that we have today, and what we had claimed was the border to begin with. So not only do we get that disputed land in Texas, but we also gain the New Mexico territory and California. So Mexico loses about a third of their land to the United States. We call this land the Mexican Cession. And in order to try and smooth things over with Mexico, because they are our neighbor, you don't want to be fighting with your neighbor, we did pay them $15 million. We had earlier offered them $30 million, which they thought was way too cheap for the valuable land of California and New Mexico territory. So they are obviously not happy with that monetary compensation of $15 million. So here we have a map that shows how the United States grew from the 13 original colonies and then the 13 original states all the way across to the Pacific Ocean. All right, once we talk about this next slide, we will have completed Manifest Destiny, spreading from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Whenever you are doing your map that is included with the guided notes, you will need to refer back to this slide. So the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War, but before that treaty was passed in the Senate, a major issue was over the expansion of slavery. This man, David Wilmot, introduced the Wilmot Proviso to Congress that stated that any land taken from Mexico would not have slaves. So in all of that newly acquired land of the Mexican Cession, there would not be any slavery. So it passed in the House, but was defeated in the Senate. Here I ask you why, and I want you to think about this question for a second. Think about the population of the United States. Why did it pass in the House, but was defeated in the Senate? If you are thinking that the northern part of the United States has a greater population and therefore has more representation in the House, that is correct. And if you'll recall, with the addition of Texas as a slave state, there was more representation for the South in the Senate. So the Gadsden Purchase was that last little bit that I said we still had to cover. This little piece of area completes the continental United States. So this is more land that we purchased from Mexico. We paid them $10 million for this tiny piece of land. Recall that we paid them $15 million for all of this area and $10 million for this. The purpose of this land was to build a transcontinental railroad through the South. So we wanted this land to be able to complete a railroad that would go across the continent through the South. So this does finalize the southern border between the United States and Mexico. Our last topic for Unit 7 is the California Gold Rush. In 1848, a small amount of gold was found in Sutter's Mill, California. Once this word spread, there was a huge migration to California, not only Americans from the East, but also immigrants from Asia and from Europe, all flocked to California, hoping to get rich quick, hoping to find lots of gold and make their fortune in California. If you've ever wondered where the San Francisco NFL team gets their name, 49ers, this is where. The people who moved west for the California Gold Rush were called 49ers because they went out there in 1849. So, prior to the California Gold Rush, the population of California was at 14,000 people. Very few white settlers lived in California prior to the Gold Rush. Most of the people there were Hispanic or Native American. By 1852, just 5 years later, that population has grown to 225,000. So the outcome of the California Gold Rush, why it's important to us, by 1850, well, 1849, California had reached a high enough population to apply for statehood. So in 1849, California applies to be a state. However, at this point, there are 15 free states and 15 slave states in the Senate. And if this situation is sounding familiar, it's because you're thinking back to the Missouri Compromise, where we had equal representation, and therefore neither the North or the South wanted to give up that equal representation. So, what will we do about the issue of California? That is where we will pick up in Unit 8.